What happens when our feelings of blame or shame get in the way of our ability to repair? Sometimes we realize we've hurt someone and we know that we fucked it up. And our brain, instead of initiating a repair process and taking accountability, starts to spiral. And it tells us stories like, oh my gosh, I've done something wrong again. Everything I do is wrong. I'm terrible. And we're not able to activate the skills that we need to apologize and to repair well. So what do? I have to be honest and say this depends a lot on the relationship and the level of grace and good faith between two people. The short and simple answer is to take space, to acknowledge that the pain or the injury has happened and say, hey, I'm not showing up well right now, and I wonder if we can resume this conversation and if I can initiate repair with you around this in 30 minutes. I want to note here that something incredibly important about repair, particularly when it comes to arriving to other people's pain, is time. Something Dr. Stan Tatkin talks about is the fact that our brains are kind of like Teflon for really good things and like sponges for bad experiences. And ultimately, this is a mechanism that we use to keep ourselves safe. However, in conflict, the longer that we spend time with unresolved pain as the consequences of another person's actions, the harder it is for us to move past it, and the more likely we are to develop negative sentiment and cement that as a memory. It's for this that repairing quickly and efficiently is one of the best options that we have, but sometimes that option really isn't available to us. There's a few avenues to go when this happens, when these sorts of shame, blame, self-loathing feelings come up and sort of eclipse the pain of another person. The first thing is to try to work with yourself in the moment, to even name how you're feeling as you initiate the repair process. It's been so many times in my life that I've had to go to people I love and be like, hey, just so you know, your feelings are important to me. I understand that I hurt you, and I'm dealing with a lot of negative self-talk around it, and I just want you to know that that's in the room with us, that's in the conversation with us, but I'm going to go ahead and try this anyway. Again, this really depends and relies on the amount of grace another person has towards you, the way that they feel about you, if they generally have a sense of good faith from you, if they feel that you generally care about their emotional experience and their pain, then most of the time people are pretty willing to accommodate this. In the event that that's not the case, right? Let's say that this is a pattern of behavior that has caused this person an incredible amount of damage over time, or that your inability to show up for repair is a repetitive and redundant experience in the relationship, then you may have to take some other routes. Before I get into these other strategies, I want to be really clear about the number one thing that you have to be mindful of, especially if you have a negative history of repair with someone. It's absolutely critical that you do not take your emotional experience, your difficulty accepting accountability, your blame and shame, and put it on the other person to deal with. It is not their fault. It is not their job to resolve that with you in the midst of a repair process that is meant to help them. There's a huge difference between making someone aware of your emotional state and making them responsible for it, and that distinction is really important. The number one most important solution if you have a negative history of repair with someone is to work on a long-term solution in a committed way, to work over time to develop the skills that you need to show up and repair more effectively. This can look like therapy, this can look like exercises around defensiveness, this can look like behavioral techniques and shifts, this can look like better pattern detection and self-awareness, there's meditations, there's mindfulness, there's a myriad of resources out there around this. But the number one solution is a concerted effort towards a long-term solve that allows you to show up better and to repair the lack of repair that this person also has experienced from you. And I want to say something else really clearly. Repeated failure to repair can be more damaging than the incidents themselves. When you stack up a bunch of unresolved conflict, unresolved pain that another person has to carry beside you, it creates resentment, it creates a lack of safety and trust, and ultimately undermines the relationship entirely. Some other options that have helped me a lot, especially when I was dealing with my own defensiveness and feelings of guilt and just struggle generally being responsible for my actions and outcomes, is communicating in ways that don't allow me to have to engage with the person in real time. This looks like communicating in writing, spending some time in writing letters, and having that initiate the conversation. Another great opportunity that comes when you decide to schedule the conversation, and again, this is about accountability, right? So you actually do have to follow up and schedule the conversation, is setting an agenda and a time limit. When we understand what we're going to be discussing together in difficult conversations and we understand how long it's going to last, it makes it easier for the conversation not to go off the rails and for everyone to know in advance that a process is going to be honored, that people are going to feel heard and seen at the end of it, and it prevents us from kind of going off script, if that makes sense. A lot of the time, relationships have patterns between them. One person hurts another person, they dismiss, they avoid, they shame spiral. The other person reacts accordingly. They feel small, unheard, unvalued. They end up maybe being antagonistic or shutting down or crying or bringing up past problems, and you volley back and forth. You slip right back into that really familiar routine together. Breaking patterns is really, really difficult because they're ingrained. What wires together fires together, right? This is how our brains work from the moment that we're born. And so when you're able to create some structure, right, when folks are able to follow a protocol, it makes it a lot easier to see the old patterns and the old behaviors surfacing and to stay on track. Another really helpful tool is a third party. This could be a couples therapist, a really trusted friend, or even a relationship mediator. I know this is sort of a taboo thing to talk about, but I don't think we actually invest enough in our relationships. I don't think that we spend enough time really thinking about how to make our relationships work in the role that community plays. And when it comes to the joy of relationship, the effect that it has on our nervous systems, our ability to co-regulate, even our health outcomes and immune systems benefit from healthy, securely attached relationships. For me, there's no price I wouldn't pay. For me, there's no level of embarrassment or support I wouldn't seek to make sure that my important relationships run the way that they should. And especially if someone's been repeatedly hurt by you, it's an incredible kind of acknowledgement of value that you would be willing to invest in such a way to ensure that they get the relief from the pain and the discomfort that you've caused them. The final answer, which I don't think many folks are going to like, is a personal evaluation about whether you're ready to be in close relationship, especially if you're dating. A lot of the times we're just moving through the world and like magnets, we attract these wonderful people into our lives, and we don't often think about if we have the capacity to hold the relationships in the way that honors them and gives them the dignity and respect and sort of gravitas in our lives that they deserve. And if you're finding that you've worked through every cycle of tools, that this person has been supportive towards you in your process, and that you're still shame spiraling, you're still not able to meet them and arrive to their pain when you hurt them, you're still struggling with accountability, it may mean that one of the boundaries you need to take to honor and respect a relationship is to step back from it and evaluate if you're necessarily ready to be dating or what your friendships and relationships need to look like while you're working this out. Relationship readiness is a really important thing, and in no way do I think because someone isn't ready necessarily to engage accountably or is still dealing with stuff that they should be alone or isolated or alienated, but it definitely means that more conversations should be had about what people can reasonably expect from you in relationships and what you can actually give. This also allows people to show up as collaborators in your experience without necessarily feeling so drained and exploited by it. It's one thing to keep making the same mistake over and over again, essentially relying on someone's labor to absorb the pain of that, to forgive that, to make their needs and expectations smaller while you're moving through whatever you're moving through. It's quite another thing to arrive to the moment that you're in, to say frankly and clearly that you're struggling with some things, to name them specifically, right? Identify the ways that you're working on them and let the person know what kinds of mistakes that you make and what kinds of mistakes that may come up and surface again. This gives people agency in the role that they play in your life and the role that they play in your process of becoming. It allows them to remove themselves maybe when certain behaviors or patterns that are really triggering to them surface for you. And it also gives them a chance to decide for themselves how close they want to be to a person that's working on this type of stuff. Because at the end of the day, everyone has expectations, whether they say it or not, and everybody has the right to get their needs met in the way that they want. Overall, I think a general sense of self-compassion is a pretty important antidote to all things related to the ways that we show up and fuck up in relationships. Remembering to be generous with yourself, remembering to apologize to yourself too. When we fail to repair, we also create a sense of disconnection for ourselves. I don't think it's very often we sit with our own self and go, God, I'm sorry that we did that to ourselves again. Oh, I'm sorry we showed up in a relationship and maybe sabotaged it again. And to generously offer forgiveness and to remember that you're imperfect and that you're earnest and that you're trying if you are, and to try to figure out as best you can how to make mistakes and take accountability even internally without having to punish yourself.